We're starting the new season with a bang, with a loud bang, because we have two exceptional guests. Professor Niall Ferguson, who is one of the most eminent historian of his generation and of our times, and President Romano Prodi, who's been twice prime minister in Italy and president of the European Commission. We thank them both because they've been so kind to accept our invitation. And we want to discuss with them the new relationship between the US and Europe after the invasion of Ukraine. So, Professor Ferguson, you're now at Hoover Institution, so you know both sides of the Atlantic. You're now in the UK, but you live a good chunk of the year in the US and in one of these exceptional think tanks. What is your perception? How are things changed, and how do you see them evolving in the medium term, let's say?
I think most people have been pleasantly surprised by how well the Transatlantic alliance has responded to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If NATO came under strain during Donald Trump's presidency, it has bounced back under Joe Biden because the Russian threat focused minds on both sides of the Atlantic. And I have to say that there was strong leadership, not only in Washington, but also in Brussels, and I might say also in London, when it came to responding and giving Ukraine support. But we need to recognize that this war is not over, that the Ukrainian offensive of the summer has achieved less than had been hoped, that popular support in the United States and in Europe for Ukraine has diminished somewhat, and that creates real challenges in the year ahead, especially with the uncertainty about American politics that will grow as the presidential election approaches next year. So I would say performance has exceeded expectations, but we are a long way from victory in this war. And in many ways, the tougher challenges have yet to come.
Well, I totally agree on this analysis, especially on the evolution, because as European, there is some sort of, everybody's with Ukraine, no major change. We always had populistic parties against Ukraine, but the feeling is that how long this war will go on, how much this will cost, why there is no, let's say, clear idea of how this war will end. And so I totally agree with Niall Ferguson told. The atmosphere is changing, especially when our newspaper started to stress the split between Republicans and Democratic inside the United States. And so there is some sort of idea that the American position could change in some way. There is no more the idea that there is a common will, because on the other side of the Atlantic there are question marks. This is, if we read our papers and also the conversation, in the last days, let's say the opinion clear is that if this uncertainty starts before the beginning of the electoral campaign, it will become more and more deeper and deeper when the electoral campaign comes. So there is this question mark for the next months.
But the mood in America, in case Trump wins, will change so drastically? Because I hear now the American talk show radio, the kind of Trumpite figure who claim that Europe should be doing more. Yes, America supports freedom and is on the Ukrainian side, but we can't always foot the bill for every war in Europe, and this is mainly a European security issue. Do you think the attitude might change, Professor Ferguson?
Well, first of all, it's no longer true that the United States is bearing the largest burden. In fact, in the last few months, the aid Ukraine receives from the European Union and its member states has overtaken the aid that it receives from the United States. So this has already changed, and therefore there can't be complaints that the US is shouldering a greater burden, because it isn't. The problem that I see is that Europeans spend more time talking about Republican doubts in the United States and not enough time talking about European doubts, because those have also grown. If you look at the most recent Eurobarometer survey of European opinion, there has been a marked decline in enthusiasm for the measures that have been taken against Russia and the measures that have been taken in support of Ukraine. This is particularly true in Central and East European countries. There's a good deal of ambivalence in Slovakia, for example. The Poles support the Ukrainian war effort, but they don't want to allow Ukraine to export its grain to Europe, or at least to Poland. So it's not only in the United States that there are doubts about the war, there are also doubts in Europe. And those may become politically just as problematic. Let's take, for example, the Slovakian election, which is in just a matter of days. It's quite possible that that will produce a pro-Russian government in Bratislava. So I think we should not only focus on American politics. There's a European political problem, and I think it's going to grow as it becomes clear that the war is going to carry on, and therefore the costs of the war are going to carry on.
Yeah, because the Slovakia case is very interesting, because could be the first time that we have a change in government. Because you are right, telling that public opinion moves and so on, but till now the governments did not move, the European government. But now you see that the Polish government is afraid, for the agricultural aspects of that, that not protecting enough the farmers will lose elections. And so we are transferring the problem, as you told, for Slovakia, even in Poland, from simply public opinion to the change of governments. Yeah. And this is a major change. But till now, all the governments were strongly for Ukraine, public opinion moving, but not changing so much, but being more vocal. Because when we have in Italy too, the populistic are not increasing against in favor of Russia and so on, but they are in some way tired.
It's also important, isn't it, that when it comes to discussion of Ukrainian membership of the European Union or of NATO, that the accession process can be stopped by just one country. And so I think even a small amount of opposition, even a single government shifting its position has big consequences when it comes to accession negotiations, which is begin soon.
Even more, that for the accession negotiation, the voice of the farmers now is becoming so important, you know. And so when we discuss for a session of former Yugoslavian countries, the problems of protecting special categories is not important. But after the Polish position, there is farmers because Ukraine is a big players in grain, in all the farmer industry. And second, the governments are worried for the dimension of the country and the cost, the possible cost. But this is not a popular problem. This is a problem of the governments that are worried for the possible consequence of enlargement, you know.
If we broaden the perspective, no, seen from, say, India or South America, the war in Ukraine, yeah, can be seen as another foolish war by Europeans in which they don't want to be involved, want to be they don't want to suffer consequences. And so there's been the emergence of BRICS, no, this new agglomeration of countries which want to be the standard bearers of the global South. Professor Ferguson, what do you make of this? Shall I call it fad? Should I call it new subject in international relationship? Is it something of lasting consequences, or is just a phenomenon short-lived in its dimensions?
Well, BRICS started out as a Goldman Sachs marketing idea for emerging market securities.
Yeah, I was working with Jim O'Neill at the time, I was in his team. So I know
Jim O'Neill's idea, and yes, and a clever idea it was too. Now it has evolved into, in some ways, a tool of Chinese propaganda, because it's a very convenient way to get major economies lined up alongside China, and therefore apparently not lined up alongside the United States. Now, from the vantage point of Brazil, which has President Lula once again in power, it's quite tempting to distance Brazil from the United States. That's, I think, in some ways part of his political tradition. For India, it's an opportunity, I think, to have it both ways. So India is simultaneously close to the United States, hosting the G20, but also participating in the BRICS. I think each member of the BRICS is pursuing its own self-interest. Together, collectively, they don't really do anything. But I think it's a sign that these big countries don't want simply to be aligned with the United States. They don't have a clear interest, or at least as direct an interest in the outcome of the war in Ukraine as Europeans do. So I wouldn't attach too much importance to the idea of a BRICS currency. I think that's largely imaginary. But I think it's a sign of the readiness of big countries like Brazil and India to be not non-aligned, but perhaps hedged in the new international order.
Yeah, but also because of necessity. I know Lula is very democratic, his mind is Western, but, you know, soya is bought by Chinese, and I understand him. You know, without the link with China, Brazil will be, let's say, without any resource. And so the problem is how China and BRICS are working for a new network. And so, in my opinion, now the progress done by BRICS enlargement and so on, and the big arena they have in which they are working for the short term is nothing. But for the long term, it creates some idea of the necessity of reforms of the international rules. And I do think that we must give an answer thinking to that, some sort of positive answering. We have to think about how IMF is ruled, how the World Bank is ruled, because in the long run, they will have much more possibility of changing things. Now, with the attitude of India, you mentioned before, that is both sides, let us put it this way, it's difficult that they can have a strong joint action together. But the necessity of having more voice in the international settlement, this is real, and we have some effect in the future because also all these countries are trading more and more with China. All the statistics are incredible. How trade relations of Brazil, India, Gulf, Saudi Arabia, trade relations with China have unbelievably increased in the last 15 years. And this is starting to have consequence. Let's say at least we are sharing interests, and so we join in some idea our future, and will not a problem of today, but will be a problem of tomorrow. And if we are intelligent, we start moving ourselves. Otherwise, there will be a clash between Big South and us.
Could it make sense to invite India to join the G7? So to transform the G7 into G8 with India as a permanent member?
I don't think it's a bad idea, but we shouldn't forget that we once asked Russia to join the G7 and then had to kick it out. It's a mistake to imagine that international order can be established just by creating institutions and then adjusting their membership. It is much more important in the international system today that the United States is building the Quad with Japan, India, and Australia, and AUKUS with Australia and the UK, than that we might add India to the G7, or that the BRICS might hold another conference, or for that matter, that the G20 might hold yet another conference. Alliance systems matter a lot in an atmosphere of Cold War, and the relationship between the United States and China is increasingly that of a Cold War. So I would say it's really alliances that matter at the moment, just as it's NATO that has been crucial in mobilizing Western support for Ukraine. I completely agree with Romano Prodi that China's economic weight leads a lot of countries to wish to avoid choosing between the United States and China. And in that sense, in this Cold War, in what I might call the Second Cold War, the non-aligned movement will be much larger than in the First Cold War. That is to say, the countries that want to avoid taking sides will be quite numerous and quite economically important.
Yeah, but this is, and so I think we go back to what is my obsession. The problem can be solved only with an agreement between China and the United States to let's say, to put some sort of peace or compromise that will help to discuss all that, you know. Otherwise, the tension will increase, because you correctly told how everybody's placing itself, you know. And so the split is going on. And so my question may make a question also to Niall. There is some sort of small movement to find some sort of compromise. I don't say agreement, but compromise between China and the United States. Am I wrong? Or in the last weeks, this conversation, this time, the going down of the tension, you remember the insults of the past. I don't listen anymore a direct confrontation, but this dialogue, second level, but preparing maybe a first level dialogue. I think that because both sides think that is better to calm down the water. Do you share this opinion?
I think the US government would like to have some kind of détente and make this relationship less tense. That's why, for example, President Biden at Hiroshima talked about a thaw, a term you would only use if you were in a Cold War. But I'm not sure that the Chinese are buying this, even although a succession of members of the US administration have gone to China. Gina Raimondo, of course, most recently, but also Janet Yellen, Antony Blinken. The problem is that the Americans don't come, and Jake Sullivan. And the problem is that the Americans do not come to talk about the things that the Chinese want to talk about. They don't come to discuss easing the restrictions on access to semiconductors. They don't come to talk about lifting or reducing the tariffs that Donald Trump imposed. And so when Westerners say we're only de-risking, the Chinese respond, you're really still decoupling. At the same time, I see the Chinese continuing what seem like preparations for a confrontation over Taiwan, most recently exercises to rehearse a blockade. And in that sense, I would say to you, Romano Prodi, I don't think that this détente is real. It's one-sided, and I don't think the Chinese believe in it. And we'll see, I think, as the Taiwanese election approaches next January, this issue becoming more and more problematic. Because here I think the two sides are on, if not collision course, they're certainly talking past one another. And that is a big worry to me.
But you don't think that is a Chinese interest to buy time for Taiwan? Simply to buy time, at least, you know. And so to have some sort of, let's say, frozen the situation. And clearly, in this framework, also to try to find a compromise for the Ukrainian war. Because I think that there is no interest, even on the Chinese side, to act in the short run for Taiwan, you know, or they need time. They need time for internal reason, for technical reason, for military, let's say, upgrading. Is not this your opinion?
Well, to be honest, Romano, I think that time is not on China's side. Economically, their difficulties are mounting. They have to worry that the US can increase Taiwan's defenses And although we know from William Burns, the director of Central Intelligence, that he thinks China is preparing to invade Taiwan in 2027, I think it's just as likely that they could blockade Taiwan next year. So it all depends whose side you think time is on. I think on the US-China confrontation, time is not on China's side, and that is why the year of maximum risk may be next year.
I understand your opinion. We shall see, because clearly they are not. I think that they are not ready to act in the let's say next year or short time. And but I understand that you think that the Chinese economic difficulties will go on for a long time. This is your opinion,
I think they are in a very difficult situation in terms of their real estate market. They are not in a position to do fiscal stimulus. Their growth rate is slowing. Youth unemployment is rising. And we in the West underestimate the extent to which there is a political crisis brewing around Xi Jinping. And that is why I think we must be worried about what, in the short run, China may do as these pressures grow. I sometimes think people in Washington underestimate just how much impact the semiconductor restrictions have had. They create a situation in which China can fall behind in artificial intelligence, for example. So I regard the situation between the US and China as quite unstable at the moment, despite talk of a thaw on the American side.
I understand, because, analyzing China, the real estate problem is 20 years old, it's like that. The new event really is young unemployment. This, in my opinion, and I was impressed by the fact that statistics of young unemployment are not anymore published, because I never, it is for me unthinkable to have young unemployment in China. This is a real new event, You give a lot of responsibility to high tech. Yes, but the main Chinese exports are not on high tech. And so they, in theory, they could have also a recovery without high tech. This is what I think. I am not sure about that, but I think that this is possible.
Well, Professor Ferguson, President Prodi, I want to thank you immensely for your kindness, for all the wisdom that you dispense in this episode of our channel. And I'm sure that our fan and our viewers will be extremely happy of this, of what they've heard and the analysis that you gave us. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great evening. All the best.
Mille grazie.
Well, to me, a great evening. To Niall, a great day.
No, he's in the UK. He's in the UK, Niall. So he's in the evening as well.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. All the best. All the best.
All the best.